Throughout this series, I've asked you to imagine the people who've influenced you. And we've asked a lot of questions. What kind of person does it take to influence, and what attitudes influence which other ones do not? Today, I want you to imagine the same people, but ask a different question. How did they influence your life? It's not about what they taught you, but it's the building blocks, perhaps even unknown to them, that were present that helped create the atmosphere of influence. People say, I just live my life and let it speak for itself. Well, that sounds great. It's accidental influence. You hope it happens. It might, but it probably won't, because it's best hit and miss. But in this lesson, I want us to explore the concept of deliberate influence, creating the conditions in which influence becomes more vibrant and powerful in a life. And there's no better place to start than with Jesus himself, because he came into the world to both influence and teach. And a little story Luke records in Luke 19 is one that every Bible class child knows. And they sing it, the song, Zacchaeus was a wee little man. Zacchaeus, the hated and shunned tax collector, wanted to see Jesus as Jesus made his way through Jericho. He came, but the crowds pushed to the edge of the route, and being small in stature, he couldn't even catch a glimpse of Jesus. And so he shinnies up a sycamore tree where he has an eagle-eye vantage point. Jesus comes by, invites himself to dinner at Zacchaeus' house, and he changes the man's life and his direction. Now, why pick Zacchaeus? Well, that's what the ticked-off crowd wanted to know as well. But the answer was simple. And in Luke chapter 19 and verse 10, you hear it. Luke tells us, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." Jesus always had a purpose when he met people. He was laser focused on reaching the reachable and ignored the idling spectator. He acted deliberately, on purpose, in every situation. Jesus was an intentional influencer. So let's do an autopsy on one single situation which influenced a woman who wanted to know more. She didn't start off that day that way, but she ended up that day like that. And it occurs in the hostile territory of Samaria, in a place overlaid with great historical significance. So let's look at John 4 this morning. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but his disciples did it, he left Judea and departed for Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to the town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well, and it was about the 6th hour. And a woman from Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." Now that scene is so simple. Jesus leaves Judea to go back to the fertile preaching territory of his native Galilee, and most avoid the filthy Samaritans. Their mixed breeding with the Assyrians betrayed a lack of true faith in God, or at least that's how the typical Jew saw it. The Jews would make an extra day's journey around the whole country just to avoid them, because these people were unsavable. Now, Jesus takes the direct route rather than that. He's different. The noon sun is high in the sky, and parched throats and growling stomachs are searching for food and water, so his disciples left and went for the search. And in the meantime, he sits down by this well of historic significance, the well dug by Jacob, the father of the Israelites. It was at Sychar, and it had furnished water for centuries. It was a place that seemed to have completely flowing water without end. But now we get there, and around this well, Jesus is sitting in the noonday sun all by himself. And no one would ever think that is strange. But remember, Jesus always takes the routine and makes it eternal. The woman comes, and so Jesus speaks to the woman. Now, women in Palestinian society were not worthy of the conversation with the man except by her husband in the privacy of their home. And Jesus, a Jewish man, speaks to a Samaritan woman. How shocking that must have been. But it did get the woman's attention. And Jesus has a request, give me a drink. It sounds simple, but those simple words crack open the door of eternity. And Jesus expands the conversation. If you knew who I was, I would be giving you the water, the living water, the water that's alive, that could invigorate you in ways that you can't even imagine. He's got the woman's attention. The woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where do you get this living water that you talk about? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. Jesus said to her, Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up into eternal life. Now the woman's perplexed. Jesus has no bucket. He has no rope. Where is he going to get water? Jacob, the great patriarch, gave us this water, but who in the world are you? So Jesus carefully coaxes. You see, there's an expression we use that says you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I don't think Jesus believed that. I think he would add to that a phrase that says, but you can feed him potato chips. In short, you can make them thirsty to ask more questions. And so he wants to make this woman thirsty for more than just water. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. Jesus called to her, said to her, Go call your husband, come here. And the woman answered, I have no husband. And Jesus said to her, You're right in saying I have no husband because you've had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you said is true. Now it gets complicated. The woman is confused. I'd love not to have to come out to this well every day. Can you give it to me? And that's where a good salesman would have pen and contract in front of her at this point. But Jesus is not wanting just to convey an idea. He wants to change a life. It's different. And so he gets real personal with this woman. He starts to ask about her husband. Knowing her strange background already, she's had serial marriages, and now she is in what seems to be an illicit relationship. No wonder she comes out to this well at noon by herself. She's the town pariah, the object of everybody's scorn and gossip. Jesus doesn't give up. Her answer doesn't shock him, and he stays with her. The woman says, Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship your Father. You worship what you do not know, and we worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. And the woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. And when he comes, he's going to tell us all things. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Now Jesus can involve her. She wants to deflect the conversation off of all this unsavory detail about her personal life. Still, Jesus continues to tell her about God, not the interpretation of either Jew or Samaritan. And he points the way because now she's willing to hear the truth. Her spiritual eyes are opening. And Jesus can say, I am the Messiah. And it thrills her. Notice something about this story and influence. Influence happens in a process. And influence doesn't withdraw when it gets complicated. Jesus hangs in there with this woman because he cares about her soul. That's the reason for influence. We want what is best for the other. We want to show others Jesus, but we do it to truly see him. We want to point to Jesus himself. So let's disassemble this conversation this morning and find out what influence is and what it does from what Jesus does. If you go down this path with him, you can find 3 touchstones along the way about influencing other people. In this story, Jesus sits down, and we discover the very first principle there. When Jesus wanted to influence, he drew close. In fact, the fact that a Jewish man engages with a Samaritan woman is absolutely stunning. It violates every social convention of the time. He doesn't get up to leave, though. He doesn't move farther away. He stays in the space because physical proximity is vital. Think of the image we began the series with in Matthew chapter 5. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand where it gives light to the entire house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and give glory to the Father who is in heaven. The emphasis is on see. You have to be visible to be the light. Hidden lamps do no good, neither do absent or invisible people. But Jesus does more than just sit there. He draws her close with his questions. Give me a drink. It starts to involve this woman. He expects something in return from her. Then, when she questions him, he starts hinting about his identity and his power. And it's like throwing a rope around a person and pulling them toward you. Now, many a bored student in a math class knows this. As they daydream, the teacher finally says, Sam, what do you think about problem number 3? And he shakes off the cobwebs and wonders what we're talking about now. And he has to come back to earth and come back to the room to answer the teacher. See, she's pulled him close. He was way out in the middle of the universe someplace, and now she's got him back in the classroom. That's what influence does. And perhaps the reason we have little influence is maybe our distance. People need closeness to feel your influence. We spend as much time, probably more time in church buildings than we do with other people, or church friends and other people. But the only way we influence others is by getting close to them. Who are your closest friends? Because they're the ones you're going to influence. You know, too often I think we want to go to the mall, sit on a bench, and just hope to emit Christian influence throughout the whole place. It's not going to happen. Because your family, your friends, and your coworkers, they're going to feel your influence far more than anybody who doesn't know a thing about you. And then Jesus moves forward. One of life's great experiences, I think, has been lost to progress. At one time in life, you could watch a train engine engage with the cars to pull them along the track. And that usually happened because there was a single train track that ran through the middle of town that everybody could watch. And engines would change cars all the time. But on an engine in a car, there are these 2 things called couples, and they're metal hooks that must be interlocked for the train to move the car down the track. Now, while that sounds very simple, if you watch it, the connection happens in a very specific way. The engine begins a slow movement in reverse until it comes close to the car. Then slowly and carefully, it bumps into the car's coupler to connect them together. The engine doesn't just sit on the track and hope the freight car moves toward it. Instead, it makes the connection to make the transit possible. This is the example that Jesus shows about influence. When Jesus wanted to influence, he made connections. Think about how Jesus did this. In short, he found something that they had in common. Both were thirsty and needed water. It was a standard physical need that they both shared at the time. But then this woman had a need, but Jesus had an answer. They were together again. He was the engine, she was the freight car. So Jesus moved carefully to her and hooked her. If you drink this water, you're going to be thirsty again. But if you only knew who I was, you would ask and you would get better water and you would not be thirsty. And she's hooked. Give me this water. She's intrigued. She's questioning. And even in the most uncomfortable moment when Jesus asked her to go get her husband, Jesus' response reveals, don't worry, I know you. You're more than just physically thirsty. You're spiritually dehydrated, aren't you? See, Jesus takes the responsibility for connecting with this woman. And that's hard for us. We want people to see our example and say, I think I like that. And too often, I think we believe that people kind of stumble into the church and they see how wonderful people we are. And so on the way out, they tackle the preacher and they just hold him down and begging for a Bible study until he relents and says, well, if you insist, we will. I suppose it could happen, but it's not likely because the rail car is not able to move toward the engine. The engine couples the car, not the car with the engine. And if we hope to have any influence at all, we have to find common ground. I fear that too many times we stress how different we are from others. And distinctive Christianity is positive as far as lifestyle, but it becomes a barrier to influence because we have to enter the lives of others to show them how we're alike. I like what the Bible scholar Karl Barth told young preachers. He said, when you enter the pulpit, you need to have a Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other. It was a way of saying you need to be able to relate the truth to the people in a way that they understand it. You're responsible for making the connection, not them. So when we meet people, for instance, we make small talk. We're trying to find common ground with each other. Think about the conversations the last couple of weeks. Boy, that winter storm was really something, wasn't it? Did you have any damage? Well, see, now we're on the same wavelength. We're trying to couple the cars with a single question. So what parts of your Christian experience can others be shared with others? Do you experience frustration? I bet they do too. How about this depression? I bet they do. Flashes of anger? You know, if you have a family, families have more in common than they are different. And somehow, how does Christ make your family different? And yet, we're all kind of looking for the same thing. How can we relate to each other like that? If there's no connection, influence crumbles. But then there's something else. Jesus just didn't have a pleasant conversation with a lonely lady at the well in Samaria. His influence had content. He knew about the water, the living water, and what it did. He knew about the worship controversies of the day, and he could add information and detail as he went along. It's not the water. It's something unending. It's not a mountain. It's the heart that makes the difference. It's not the teaching. It's the Messiah. So we learn when Jesus wanted to influence, he gave answers. I think if there's a single misconception about influence in the Christian life, it may be this. I've heard people say, I'm sorry, I don't do evangelism. I let my influence speak for itself. Now that's not wrong. It's just kind of short-sighted. Because what do you think they're going to learn from watching you? Do you think they're going to draw out the right information, the right conclusions about who Jesus is and how he wants us to respond to him just by watching you? And then what misunderstandings might they get? That's why you have to close the loop of influence. You have to open your mouth, and your life may draw, but it should prompt the desire to be somebody better. And that's where the words have to tell the story. Notice Jesus corrected a misunderstanding with words. She starts with an idea that a Messiah would one day come, yet that's not the message. Jesus wants to get across a single message. The Messiah was not a someday idea. He was the Messiah, standing there in front of her, offering her living water. It's only then that this woman runs into town, breaking every social custom, to shout, "I have found him!" And if we really want to influence, we have to make sure we have the content to go with the example. After all, remember, Peter reminds us of this fact. In your hearts, honor Christ as Lord, as holy. Always being prepared to give a defense or answer to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that's within you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. See, in this passage, Peter discusses how living for Christ in front of a skeptical world is done. And so the man who has spent the time with Jesus knew that a moment would come and you have to give an answer for the hope. What's the answer? What are you going to say? You have to have an answer to the question, because without it, you're nothing but a bell without a clapper. And we stand right now at an interesting intersection in history. We've been isolated for a year, sometimes through orders, but mainly through our concern for our own physical health, that of others and our family. We're coming out of this self-imposed spiritual hibernation. And we're going to be rubbing shoulders more and more with people we haven't seen for a while, or people we'll even meet for the first time. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what will we do with that moment? And now is the time to decide. So I want to ask you these questions to help you explore your own influence. How can I grow closer to the people I want to influence? Now, it may start with a phone call and turn into an afternoon walk in the neighborhood. It may be coffee at Starbucks, but for influence to happen, you have to narrow the gap and grow close. What connections, secondly, can I make with those people? How are we alike? What do we share as human beings? In truth, we're more alike than different. How can we intentionally make the connections with others we want to influence with God's truth? And then third, what content can I comfortably and authentically deliver? You see, we are Christians because truth invaded our lives and changed us. What made the difference for you? Can you say that? What changed your life? Can you express that? Can you share how your faith has made a difference in your family, in your profession, in your life? See, that's the natural outgrowth of a spiritual journey. If we do those things in a very quiet way, we can meet our own woman at the well. That's what happened to Ashley Joss. Josh was shopping at her local Target store, and one of her New Year's resolutions was to read more books. And so she gravitated to the book section, and there was a single book that caught her attention, so she bought it, took it home. She sat down to read it, and about the time she got ready to read it, her dog barked, and she had to go find out what was the matter. So she pitched the book to the side, and as it happened, she noticed that something came out of one of the pages. What she found was a $5 bill with a note attached to it. A note left in the book by another shopper. The note read, "To the person who buys this book, I'm having a tough day. I thought maybe I could brighten someone else's day with this little surprise. So go buy a coffee, a donut, and a face mask. Practice some self-care today. Remember, you are loved. You are amazing. You are strong." It was signed by a woman named Lisa. The Joss never knew who she was. But Joss was so touched by that note that she shared it on Twitter, and others read it, and it began to change them. Her father bought groceries for people in front of him at the supermarket. There was another woman who had just lost her daughter, who was 19 years old, in a car wreck. She was so touched that she decided that for every day she was going to do something kind for someone else. And it was a way of helping her grief. It taught a simple lesson. Don't let the opportunity pass to change someone's life. This may be your chance. This may be your opportunity. The only question is, will you take it? Thank you for joining me. We'll be back again next Sunday morning.